Well, I
around.
remembered an old film I saw when I was very young that Todd Browning made called Freaks. And they had some people without legs who could drag themselves along, and that went through my mind when I made the entrance. So I kept the snake quality in her by having to pull herself along with her arms. But she also crawled like a snake. Oh, the rattle, I wanted to give it a rattlesnakes so that the sound department could make her presence known by just a rattle. And you have to think of those things. And I actually, the Medusa in the original story never had a bow and arrow. I took that from Diana, the legend of Diana.
This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, and you're listening to Python's Paradise, your film and music show. And this is your host, Greg Gilbert. And I have a wonderful guest here today. In fact, this takes me way, way, way back into my childhood because I'm going to get to celebrate the 35th anniversary of not only one of my all-time favorite movies, which is Clash of the Titans. I'm going to get to celebrate the legacy of one of the brilliant minds behind it, as well as other films, Ray Harryhausen. On the phone with me now is John Walsh from the Ray Harryhausen Foundation. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Greg. Good to be with you today.
Yes, wow. I got to give you some background here because when my mom found out that I was calling about Clash of the Titans, she was like, wow, that was a favorite in our family, you know? And I remember when that film came out and there was like all the stickers and the cereal boxes. And I think between me and my two brothers, we had them all.
Well, I think there was a promotion, certainly in Europe, with the Olympics that was happening at the time, and a well-known brand of crisps, or what you would call chips. So over here, I was eating quite a lot of chips in the summer of 1981 to make sure I got all the badges.
Yeah.
Pins, as you'd call them, pins, of course, not badges. But yes, so there was quite a lot of merchandise for that particular film.
Yeah, and I didn't see it initially in theaters. I was 9 years old when that came out, but I had the pleasure a few years ago at one of the outdoor free screening sites they do here in Fredericton. I suggested to them to do Clash of the Titans one year, and they did it. And man, it just took me back. It was wonderful to see it up on a big screen and see all those great special effects.
It's a film that holds up really well, I think. You know, it's all the techniques they used in that film, a technique called stop motion animation. And we had a screening here in London at the British Film Institute about 2 years ago. And there was lots of young people. It was called a Family Sunday Fun Day. So there was lots of children in the audience, and I was quite anxious because they're used to growing up with the films of Peter Jackson and Jim Cameron and all the CGI. And I thought, gosh, will they be, you know, fidgeting in their seats when they see the stop-motion creatures? But no, they loved it because to young eyes, that technique is new to them. So what can I say? The magic is retained in that film.
Well, you know what? It's interesting because down at those same summer screenings that they do here, I remember one year they did The Wizard of Oz, and it was packed, so packed I had to walk a distance just to get to the site. And it's like that movie doesn't have CGI, but yet it still brings them in.
Yes, it does. You know, I think there's certain films that at certain points in time, King Kong's another one, Gone with the Wind, of course, Jaws. When we think of Jaws, we don't think of, you know, the marvelous shark that Steven Spielberg called Bruce, but we think of the kind of the tension and the craftsmanship of that film. But actually, he was quite limited by a very simple puppet that was floating in the water. And yet, audiences today love that film and would hate it to be replaced with, say, a CGI shark. So certain films, I think, retain their magic. And when Steven Spielberg re-released E.T., I think for its 20th anniversary, he did some CGI improvements to the face of the creature. And I don't think it went down too well with the fans of the film, the hardcore fans. And so, of course, when it came back out for Blu-ray, all of those CGI sequences were kind of brushed aside, and it was put back to its 1982 classic face that was designed by Carlo Rambaldi. So I think, that obsession with trying to modernize everything can sometimes leave consumers and filmgoers a little bit cold.
It's interesting you mentioned E.T. I had Dee Wallace on here last year, and she was talking about that film.
Yes, it's a great film, and I think it falls into the pantheon of films like The Wizard of Oz and other films where, they tend, even though they're of their time, the magic that those films produce doesn't age. And here at the Ray Harryhausen Foundation, we're so lucky to have what's considered to be the largest animation collection anywhere in the world outside of the Walt Disney Studios.
Well, it's interesting because back a few years ago, it would have been in the 90s, I did a lot of autograph collecting. And I remember I wrote to Ray Harryhausen, and I don't remember everything I wrote, but I remember I said to him how much Clash of the Titans meant to me growing up, because I used to daydream about that film. Maybe that's why I didn't do so well in school, but nonetheless, I used to daydream about that film in class, and I told him how much that film meant to me and how much I loved it, and I got a response. He sent me a nice autographed picture of himself, and there's a little letter that came with it. He said that he always appreciates that films mean more to fans than just a few hours of entertainment.
Yeah.
And he said he hoped that I liked Mysterious Island when I saw it. At the time I had not, but I've since seen it. And I've still got that autographed picture, and I cherish it, and I was really glad to have made that connection before he passed.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people have similar stories that they've contacted Ray, who many people imagine is this rather aloof kind of, he was a film producer as well as a special effects expert, but people imagine he's quite aloof in an ivory tower, and he's hard to access, because if you try to pick up the phone today and ring, any well-known person in Hollywood, it would be layers of management and agents you'd go through, whereas Ray lived in London. His telephone number was in the London telephone directory. When I was a film student in the late 80s, I opened up the telephone directory, looked for H for Harryhausen. There he was, Ray Harryhausen. I rang him up and just said to him, look, I'm making a documentary at the film school, and I'd love it to be about your stop-motion animation techniques, and would you consider meeting with me? And this sort of rather impressive, booming voice came down the phone, American accent. He sounded very much like Charlton Heston in my eyes, and said, sure, I'd love to meet you. And I met with him, I made a documentary, and that got the ball rolling for me. When I left film school, then I became a professional documentary and drama director. But I stayed in touch with Ray all of those years, and he had enormous time for all of the fans. And, many of the fans would write, as you did, to talk about a film you liked in particular. Some would write asking technical questions. Others would write and send him examples of things they did to get a verdict, as it were, from the master of monsters and movie making. And a young man wrote to him in the late 60s, early 70s, I think it was, and sent him a mask he'd created of the Cyclops from the seventh voyage of Sinbad. And Ray was so impressed with this mask, he kept it as part of his overall collection, and it went into the cabinets along with all the other creatures. And if you look at that mask today, you'll see a little plaque on the bottom where it says "Mask by Rick Baker." And it's Rick Baker, the 7 times Academy Award-winning makeup effects artist.
Wow.
Ray, before he was, of course, Mr. 7 times Oscar. And Rick Baker was a great friend of the foundation. And Rick was inspired the way you and I were, Greg, by writing to Ray. Ray corresponded back with him. And look where it led for Rick Baker, a true mega talent.
Well, the same year that Clash of the Titans came out, Rick Baker made An American Werewolf in London.
That's right. The seminal werewolf film, directed by John Landis, who, as coincidence would have it, a very good friend of Ray Harryhausen. John Landis came over to London a few years ago and recorded a commentary with Ray for The Mighty Joe Young in Ray's house. I started a commentaries program recording all of the films that didn't have commentaries recorded by Ray, which was 80% of them, unbelievably or not. Clash of the Titans, Mysterious Island, many of the Sinbad films, no commentaries have been recorded. So I said to Ray, look, I could record these with you in your house, in a digital quality. And he said to me, I'm not sure I'd have anything interesting to say, and I don't know if I'd remember because the films were a long time ago. And we thought, well, let's give it a go with Clash of the Titans. And, of course, he loved it. He remembered lots of things about the film. And so then when we did other commentaries and we found out that people were in town like John Landis, we'd say, you're coming to visit Ray anyway. Would you mind sitting with Ray and doing a commentary? Which film would you like to sit with him and talk about? And John Landis said, I'd like to chat about Mighty Joe Young because for me, that was my film. That was the film that got me excited about movie making and monsters and gorillas. So it is fascinating. You think of Rick Baker, the connection with John Landis, the Academy Award-winning special effects for American Werewolf in London. And, John came to visit Ray on the set of Clash of the Titans in Pinewood, watching him with Pegasus and the frustrations of making the horse fly convincingly, at a time when he was making American Werewolf in London at the same time. So wheels within wheels, as they say.
Wow. I would have loved... The Clash of the Titans doesn't have a commentary track on the Blu-ray.
No, it doesn't. We recorded one. The Foundation owns it. All of my recordings I made with Ray I've donated to the Foundation. So we recorded for all of those films that didn't have commentaries. First Men in the Moon, Golden Voyage of Sinbad.
Oh, I love that.
1 million years BC. You kind of think they surely must have recorded commentaries for these films. No, only Jason and the Argonauts and a couple of the early black and white films have had commentaries recorded. So I thought it's the least I could do. Since Ray gave me sort of, if you like, my start in documentary filmmaking, I said, look, I'll fund these. I'll film them as well as record them. I'll donate them to the Foundation. Ray asked me at that point then to become a trustee of the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, which, I was thrilled and honoured, and I still am. And I find myself in a sort of a custodian position now, looking after Ray's legacy, trying to make sure that we let people know what Ray did through preservation of his creatures and his artwork, but also we have these 25 plus hours of original recordings that have never been heard outside of the Foundation. And I think we sent you a clip or two for yourself to play to your listeners. It is surprising. It's one of those things you can't do after the event. When great people from the world of entertainment leave us, people are scrambling around to find where's the last interview and do we have commentary tracks and do we have stills and photos? But of course, all of these assets need to be gathered when a person is alive.
Well, I hope that Clash of the Titans will get a release with that commentary track. I would love to hear that.
I hope so. I mean, the film was remade in 2010, and that's when the original film got a Blu-ray release. But it was a very basic Blu-ray release. It was great that the film was released, but it really could have been remastered. They could have gone back to the more original film elements. And I think it could do with another release, with an overall reassessment of the picture, a better scan of the print, a new sound mix. And I think there is definitely an audience for it. We have lots of original content that we can work with Warner Brothers to make it a very special release. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a new release this year for the 35th anniversary, which is a shame. So
that's okay. We're going to celebrate it right here.
We are. There's 3 anniversaries this year, Greg. I'm not sure if you realise there's the Clash of the Titans, which you contacted us about and reminded us it's 35 years. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Also, it's 50 years anniversary this year of 1 million years BC.
Absolutely.
Yes, the Raquel Welch classic. And the other one, and it's 60th anniversary, so 60 years old this year, older than both of us, I assume, is Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Yes. Wow. Well, I'll tell you, I was not a big fan of the remake of Clash of the Titans. And I thought the CGI stuff was great in it, but I have to say I was not thrilled. There was one thing I felt very insulted by that they did in the film, and man, I just wanted to scold the filmmakers for it. And it was a scene where they were going through some case or chest or something, and they found Boo Boo the owl, and they tossed it aside. And I was like, how dare you remake people? How dare you? Did you see that?
Yeah. There's a bit of a story there because on the plus side for the remake, it got people looking at Ray's film and saying, hey, Ray's film is perhaps a more magical experience. The remake did make lots of money, so in a sense, it did what it set out to do. It was a successful commercial film.
Well, it got a few Razzie nominations, too.
No, it did, absolutely, yes.
And it deserved them.
It did indeed. And the filmmakers were in touch with the foundation to ask if they could have permission to work with Ray on some of the creatures and have Bubo the Owl in the film. When a deal couldn't be reached, for various reasons that I'm not sure I'd be able to go into, but a deal couldn't be reached with Ray because of the nature of what they were doing, and they weren't able to give as much information as perhaps the Foundation wanted, then talks kind of broke down. And I suspect that's why that rather unceremonious scene with Bubo was included as a bit of a passing shot to Ray, which is disrespectful at worst and ill thought at best. But a lot of people love Bubo the Owl. He's not by any means the Jar Jar Binks of the Harryhausen family of monsters. He is a beloved creature that people often talk about. And when we have polls and we ask people on Facebook favourite Harryhausen moments, of course those major sequences of the skeletons and the Medusa come up. Bubo features regularly. He is somebody that brings younger viewers into the film, and it was something George Lucas learned when he made the Ewoks for Return of the Jedi, and of course Jar Jar Binks for the Star Wars prequels. If you can tie in all of the members of the family, it becomes a truly inclusive experience. And the very young children that we had at the screening a couple of years ago in London, they loved it when Bubo came on. They were clapping their hands every time Bubo appears. So I think when a creature turns up that's fun, that's non-threatening, seems magical, and is much smaller than you, and of course you're going to bring the audience with you. I think it's a shame about the 2010 film, but as I say, the big plus for us is that it throws a very positive spotlight onto the 1981 classic. And of course there was a follow-up, Wrath of the Titans, and a few years later, 2 or 3 years later, and that didn't do quite as well. But we at the Foundation own the original sequel to Clash of the Titans, and it's called Force of the Trojans. And so perhaps one day in the future that might come to light. Who knows?
I hope so. I'm going to say this, though, about number one with Jar Jar Binks. There's a reason so many people hated that character in Phantom Menace, because he was a pointless character, whereas Boo Boo was not a pointless character. People got to stop and think. Boo Boo was the one that got the eye away from the Stygian witches. Boo Boo was the one that found Pegasus when Perseus needed the horse at the end of it. Boo Boo did a lot of stuff. He even flew and got the head of Medusa when Perseus needed it in that climatic battle. So Boo Boo served a purpose.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. I know some of the reviews at the time were slightly unkind and suggested that Bubo the Owl was
a rip-off of R2-D2, which is not true.
Take on R2-D2, but as we at the Foundation know, and big fans of Ray know, that the mechanical owl was something Ray had planned in the early 70s. So Clash of the Titans had been on the development slate for a long, long time, but the amount of money needed meant that they weren't able to do it with their usual partner, Columbia Pictures, which was a great shame. And interestingly, the film went to many different studios. So Eye of the Tiger had come out in 1977, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, the same year as Star Wars. And Charles Schneer, Ray's producing partner, and Ray were looking for a big investment for this film, which was potentially going to be one of their last, but they needed a bigger budget. And when you think that Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger had a budget of around $2.5 million, $2.5 million, I mean, that's pretty low amount of money. The previous Sinbad to that was in 1973, the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, that was around just $1.5 million. So we're talking, very tight budgets. Even though the films have that kind of epic scale and sensibility, the budgets were quite tight. So the first studio that got interested in Clash of the Titans was Orion Pictures. And you'll probably remember Orion Pictures from recent films such as The Terminator and lots of great action films from the sort of the mid-'80s.
UHF.
Well, that's right. So they had that quite distinctive logo, didn't they? Where it's, the stars of Orion go round in a circle and the logo comes up.
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
Almost as memorable as Korolko, who had that fabulous Jerry Goldsmith's logo at the front of their movies. So they went down to see Orion Pictures. They struck a deal with a budget of $15 million. So quite a lot of money, quite a big step up from previous films. It meant they could film for longer, have more creatures, have bigger star names, like as we ended up with Maggie Smith and Sir Laurence Olivier. But they had one stipulation, and that was the casting of Perseus. They had somebody on their books who they were hoping to turn into a big star, and it was the Austrian muscle man Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Wow.
Yes.
He went on to do Conan the Barbarian.
Absolutely. So and this was slightly pre-Conan, I think, because Conan, I think the original one was 1982.
Well, I gotta say this, a lot of these films, unlike today, took a long time to make, like between Clash of the Titans and Conan the Barbarian, both released in 81 and 82 respectively.
Yes.
They took 4 or 5 years to make, and that goes back to the R2-D2 argument. It's like Ray would not have known about that, so...
Yes, exactly. So perhaps had they suggested Arnold Schwarzenegger perhaps later on when he was more successful, they might have considered him. But Ray was very keen to have a proper actor in the role of Perseus because there was lots of emotional challenges for the character. So they declined, unfortunately. So they took the property to MGM, and MGM were keen to work with Ray and with Charles Schneer, and so things got back on track. They had a stipulation, however, and it was one that they did agree to. They asked for a particular member of the cast to be replaced. The original role that you know of Burgess Meredith in the film, where he plays that rather theatrical sort of guide in the film. That's right, yes. He was originally going to be played by Sir John Gilbert.
Okay.
And the studio had a deal with Burgess Meredith, and I think it was because of the ongoing projects they had with the Rocky franchise, and they said that if you can actually put him in that role of Ammon, I think the name was, looking at my notes here, Ammon was the...
Yeah, Ammon, yep.
Ammon, yes.
Yep.
And so they agreed. The budget was locked in. They continued with the cast as agreed, and the film came out in the summer of 1981, June the 12th.
The same time as Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Indeed, and interestingly, and it's a fact that not a lot of people know, Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is a magical, brilliant movie, Clash of the Titans made more money in Europe than Raiders of the Lost Ark did.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So Clash of the Titans finished just outside the top 10 in America, in North America.
Number 11, actually.
Number 11, that's right. Yeah, with around a 41 million take in ticket sales, which was pretty good. But actually, it made more in Europe than Raiders of the Lost Ark did. And I'm not sure if it's because they might have been released at different times. I know that we got Clash of the Titans, I think it was in July, in the summer of that year. So I'm not sure when Raiders opened in Europe. But it is an interesting fact, and one that Ray is always tickled by, that he beat Steven Spielberg and George Lucas in Europe with Clash of the Titans. So it was a great success, but some of the reviews were less than kind at the time. But many of those reviews have since been reassessed, and it is now considered to be, quite the classic. And that's why I think we're discussing it today. It's because it's not a film that's been forgotten and rediscovered. It's a film that you and I have grown up with on VHS and Laserdisc, and it's regularly on television. We could sit with our brothers and sisters and our mums and dads and watch it. There was something there for all of the family.
I gave Clash of the Titans a 10 out of 10. Like, I review movies, and man, I love that film. I never had a qualm with it.
The soundtrack is about to be re-released. Intrada, who are that marvelous record label that release classic film soundtracks, they're releasing it on vinyl, on a 180-gram vinyl double album, and that comes out, I think it's later this month.
Oh, the soundtrack, the music was gorgeous.
It was. It was reminiscent of what you think Jerry Goldsmith or John Williams might have done. And in fact, Lawrence Rosenthal, who was suggested for the project, was suggested by by John Williams. Ray was a big fan of film music, and it was so important to him to get the right composer. Bernard Herrmann was a family friend of Ray Harryhausen and scored 4 of his movies. But sadly, Bernie wasn't around in 1981. He died after Taxi Driver in 76.
Yep, that's true, yep.
So they were looking for somebody to take on the mantle of this major film. They had money to spend, and they went to John Barry, as I discovered recently. We've discovered a tape in the Harryhausen archives where John Barry, on a piano, had done some sample tracks for Clash of the Titans, which is really quite fabulous. Unfortunately, because of scheduling commitments, John Barry wasn't able to complete the project. And so they were hoping to get John Williams. He was unavailable. John Williams suggested Lawrence Rosenthal, and it was a particular magical combination because amongst Lawrence Rosenthal's catalogue of works, I think this stands out as possibly his very best.
I'm going to tell you one thing I also really respect about Ray Harryhausen is his humility, because I remember watching a YouTube video where he was at one of these conventions, signing autographs, and he was asked about if he knew about the remake coming out. And I remember his response, and I thought this was so cool. He says, they would never get that cast again. And I like the fact he credited the cast, and he didn't take any credit himself, and I thought how kind of him to acknowledge the cast.
Well, he was really a collaborative person. In an industry that's full of takers, Ray Harryhausen was somebody who was a giver. He gave of his time, and he gave of his experiences, and he gave of his credits as well. Credit where credit was due. It took a good performance by an actor working against, a blank background to make a convincing fight. So, if you cast the right actors and they can shadow box in that sequence, because, of course, it's photographed with a space left where the creature would be put in later, so the actors have to use their imaginations. And the better the actor can perform with his imagination, whether he's been chased by a horde of skeletons or it's the Medusa in the temple, then I think that adds credence. And when you think of Harry Hamlin in Medusa's temple, that's a sequence that's kind of low on fast-paced action, and so none of that high-octane stuff.
I want to bring that up for a second, because one of the things I hated in the remake was the Medusa sequence. I found that there was too much turning to stone, there was too much jumping in and out. One of the things I loved about the Medusa sequence in the original movie, number one, was how they introduced Medusa. They just showed the tail wagging in the shadow, and they saw the snaky head shadow coming across that pillar. And then you saw that one shot where the guard gets that arrow in the back to establish that she's an archer as well. And then you have one, not a dozen like in the remake, one time where one guy gets turned to stone. And you see that close-up of her eyes. And I loved it there. You got Harry Hamlin, and rather than jumping in and out like they did in the remake, you got him frozen there against the pillar and the beads of sweat on his head like he is nervous. And I like that sequence there where he's looking at the shield that he tosses aside. It says, you hear the voice, for one day this shield will guard your life. And it's like it was the very way that he did not expect it to guard him. And that, I thought there was so much tension in that scene. And Medusa, what a brilliant creation. I love that sequence.
Well, you feel the sense of weight as she drags herself on. You feel that tension because of the careful use of music and sound. And overall, it's the combination, isn't it, Craig, of the right music, the right actor, the right performance, and also the right tempo. Because not everything has to be cut fast-paced as if it's a Michael Bay meets the Marvel action heroes. You can watch a clip from a lot of the wonderful superhero films that are on at the moment, and there's a new Superman opening, of course, versus Batman. And I'm a big fan of the Chris Reeve Superman films.
Same here.
And I could tell, if you just showed me a frame from one of the 4 films Chris Reeve made, I could tell you which film it was and whereabouts it was in that film. Whereas today, if you showed me a frame from most of the current superhero films, I couldn't even tell you what film it was. So, when they remade Clash of the Titans, I think they decided, you know what, let's try and give something so new to people that they won't feel it's just an updated experience. And, of course, the Medusa in that film had no sense of danger or weight about her. And some people describe her as looking like a swimwear model.
Yes.
That she was quite seductive, and that was a different take. But actually, you didn't feel threatened, and it just seemed very ho-hum, and it was another task for him to complete, much in the same way as it would be with a video game. And yet they probably had more resources on the new Clash of the Titans, but without that sort of spark, that singular spark of imagination, if you're going to get a committee together, how can we update this? Well, what can we do with the software? Well, this is what we can do with the software. Great. Let's incorporate that into the temple sequence. What else can we do? What can we do with sound? You know, if this is going to be 3D, should we have stuff flying at the camera? So it really was a case of the tail wagging the dog. And it brings you back round full circle to who and how Ray worked. He worked completely on his own in a room with the models he created from sketches and he molded, and putting them in front of a rear projection of the actors he'd filmed on location some months previously. He would then, frame at a time, film his models against those rear projections. So there was no discussion from a committee of executives, how are we going to shoot this scene? How are we going to animate this sequence? Show me your rushes or your dailies the next day so that we can pull it apart with a focus group. So few people in Hollywood get to have that singular focus and that singular vision that when they do, and whether it's Peter Jackson with the original Lord of the Rings trilogy or pretty much anything Steven Spielberg touches or Jim Cameron, you know, these are people who have earned the right to have that singular voice. And when they have their singular voice heard, there's a great success. I remember reading an article not long before Jurassic Park came out, the original Jurassic Park, saying that this could be a big turkey for Steven Spielberg because dinosaurs in the cinema are box office poison. And the article pointed to Baby, The Secrets of the Lost Legends, the Disney flick from the early 80s, which has a great Jerry Goldsmith soundtrack, but was an enormous bomb from the studio. And I thought, gosh, really? They're going to try and suggest that Steven Spielberg might make a film like that? And, of course, the film came out and redefined what we understood to be special effects. And Arnold Schwarzenegger's film, The Last Action Hero, which went head-to-head with it, kind of crashed and burned, and that was expected to win in that fight. So I think allowing filmmakers to have their voice is a great deal of the secret behind Ray's success. You know, there was no other rival. You could say in sport and in politics and in other walks of life where people are successful, there are natural rivals. There wasn't for Ray Harryhausen. There were a few other people who worked in stop motion, not in Ray's league. They didn't work on the size of projects. They didn't have the scope of imagination. There was nobody else. You know, for nearly 4 decades, he was unchallenged, not just as a special effects artist, but as a creator. Because, of course, Greg, we must remember that he created these films. Whereas if you or I were making a Jason the Argonauts today, we might maybe go to Industrial Light and Magic and get the fabulous team of men and women there to work with us, but ultimately become this major collaborative process where what you might want to do is limited by what they can do with the technology and what the studio will allow you to do in the time frame. Ray really did have it good. You know, he was able to do what he wanted on his own terms, and that's why his body of work, when you look back at it, is so unique.
Yeah, and going back to the Medusa sequence, I love that addition of the two-headed dog.
That's right.
The two-headed dog. I thought that was a great sequence, you know, and you see the eyes waving up and down in that shadow, and the dog jumps out there, and it was we always called him at the house Medusa's guard dog.
Great name, yeah.
And that was
that Medusa sequence had a big problem with the censors. We had a different problem here in the UK than you had in the US. Because in the US, of course, at that time, and remembering this is a family film, Medusa's not wearing anything on the top, so effectively she's a bare-chested woman. So the censors in America talked to MGM about cropping the frame so we don't see her top, or perhaps blurring it, or reshooting the sequence with her wearing some kind of top on her top. And yet they had no problem with the beheading of Medusa that happens sort of 3 or 4 minutes into that sequence. whereas in the UK it was the absolute opposite problem. They had no problem with her being bare-chested, but they did have a problem with the decapitation for a more or less family certificate that the film got.
It's interesting you mentioned that, and I don't want to get off course here, but 1981 also was a year that Friday the 13th Part 2 came out, and I remember my cousins were baiting my brothers and I to watch that film, and there was like 2 or 3 graphic killings that happened in that film, but the moment Kristen Baker wanders across that lake in the nude, that was when my mother came in and turned the television off. It's like nudity's a problem, but violence isn't.
It is interesting. It feels like it's a double standard, doesn't it? But I think the censors are worried that people will be corrupted by those erotic images rather than the very violent ones. And of course, when we think about when we turn our news on, we see our evening news, it's violence that dominates. It is violence against people that really causes most of the problems in society. So, things have moved on a bit, I guess, since those days. But it is interesting the choices that were made on our behalf by the censors.
Well, you know what? I come from a Christian household, and I find it interesting that in the church, they play off this whole thing about family this, family that. Now, I've never wanted children, I've been very much a loner. I don't mind having a partner, but I find it interesting when it comes to sex. They treat it great if it's for procreation, but I think I've heard one sermon in my whole life about the Song of Solomon. It's a book in the Bible. And I read that book through, and it's all about sex and not one mention of procreation. And I think I know why I've only heard it mentioned once, because it's like it goes against what they think sex should be, procreation. And it's like, why should sex be joyless? And it goes for the whole thing about nudity. Why should it be joyless?
Absolutely, and it's. I suppose it's all about control. When we think about religions and all religions, across all faiths, the sort of terms and conditions you sign up to are ultimately about control being taken out of your hand, and often the Vatican or head office, whoever that might be, being in control of how you live your lives. And there was a time when that was maybe relevant to people, and it kept law and order to some extent. But in a more modern age now, it's perhaps less relevant.
Yes. Well, looking at some of the creatures in Clash of the Titans, I know we talked about Medusa and the dogs, and of course the Kraken. We all know that great line, "Release the Kraken," and I love the Kraken sequences.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting. If you look at the official Warner Brothers website, they have the trailer for Clash of the Titans on there, and it's mostly still photography and lots of sort of whooshing kind of Superman lights behind it. But there's a couple of snatches of images from the film of Pegasus and Medusa, but there's actually a deleted sequence of the Kraken as he comes out of the water before he attacks Argos. And it's interesting, we haven't found too many deleted scenes from Clash of the Titans, but that's one that I'm currently looking for. The other, when I interviewed Ray in the late 80s, I said to him, what sequences didn't work or did you want to do? And he said, well, even for Clash of the Titans, where we had lots of money, we didn't always have the time. He said, I did tests with Pegasus with just the legs hanging and the wings flapping to see if that could get me around a lot of the animation. Because if you think about it, you've got the four legs galloping, and the two wings flapping. You need to keep those in a certain synchronicity, because if you make a mistake, you have to start again, and weeks of work could be thrown away. So he tried it with just the legs hanging, and he said it didn't work at all. It looked like the horse was dead. And I said, wow, where's that footage? He said, oh, it's here somewhere, John, but I'm not going to show it to you. And he didn't. But we are still looking for that footage. We won't necessarily make it public, but we'd like to know that we have it. And when I got to know Ray a bit better in later years, he told me some of the sequences that were planned for the film that had to be abandoned. And interestingly, in the graphic novel or the cartoon version of the film, the adaptation that came out at the same time, there was a hint of one of the sequences that had been planned but had to be abandoned. So in the film, Calibos you only ever see him as a rather sort of grotesque Lord of the Marsh. The only time you see him as a sort of good-looking young man is when he's that clay maquette and he's in that sort of arena sequence. And of course, he's the son of Maggie Smith's character, of the goddess. Now, in the original version, there was going to be a pre-title sequence, as Ray told me, or it might have been later in the film, but pre-title is where he saw it, that Theseus' son, so Maggie Smith's son, was this playboy character, very good-looking, an eligible young bachelor, somebody who was going to be a suitor for Andromeda. They're very much sort of the Prince Charming of his day, but quite spoiled. And one of his pastimes was hunting. And this hunting sort of got more and more bloodthirsty until he slayed all of the flying horses from Zeus's, as it were, private herd, with only the stallion Pegasus remaining alive. And that was the reason why he was turned from the good-looking young prince into Calibos, the Lord of the Marsh. But that was a planned sequence. Ray wanted to have a herd of flying horses and showed Calibos as the young Prince Charming slaying the horses. Because in the film, you sometimes wonder, well, what's he being punished for? It's all of a sudden he's being punished. Is it a slight to Maggie Smith? I think had you seen what he'd done to those beautiful horses, you might have felt, there's a motivation for why Zeus appears to be being so cruel. So that's a shame, because that would have been a marvelous sequence to see. And we have some sketches and we have some notes on that, but there was nothing photographed. And just filming the one flying horse was so complex that the idea of doing lots of them and a herd of them just would have taken up so much time. It would have been to the detriment of the overall story, and they would have lost creature sequences perhaps throughout the rest of the film. But it's an action-packed film. It's a long film. It's one of Ray's longest. I think it's his actual longest film. It has more creatures than any other film, more action sequences, just more of everything, really. So I don't think we can feel too hard done by that.
I find it interesting, too, in the remake, Pegasus, for whatever reason, is black.
I think the reason is simply to offer something different. You know, there's even a convoluted storyline about who Calibos is that doesn't quite work.
No, it doesn't. No, they kind of combined Calibos with Acrisius.
Yes.
In the remake, and it didn't work.
No, and it's a shame. They had some very good actors in that film. You had Ray Fiennes in there, and some really terrific actors. Liam Neeson, who can be sometimes quite good. So it's a shame, really. I think had there been a more singular focus, or had they maybe concentrated on making Force of the Trojans, the sequel to Clash of the Titans, people might have felt there was a reason to go back to it. But what can I say? Both parties came out of it well. Warner Brothers made a ton of money, and Ray's film was I suppose, elevated in stature.
Well, I got to say, I was going to talk about the cast for a moment, but you mentioned music earlier, and I'm going to tell you, I loved how music was used in Clash of the Titans. And one sequence that really caught me was, you got the great shadow sequence where Calibos is being turned into this grisly-looking creature, and it shows the shadow. But I also like the sequence where Maggie Smith is talking to the statue of Perseus, and she lays him down in that arena, and he wakes up in Joppa, and you can just see her image go further and further away. And I love that calming but alarming faint sound of the flute you hear in the background. Mm. Yeah, that's a nice touch.
Yeah, it seems sort of quasi-religious or something. It sounds like it's slightly choral as well. There's an interesting choir use throughout the film in different places, and they've used the choir more like a sound effect rather than a musical accompaniment. So that's all quite eerie. And I suppose when we think about some of the scores that were around at the time, Jerry Goldsmith's score for The Omen, very choral.
Nice, yeah.
Lalo Schifrin's score on the Amityville Horror, which has just recently been re-released. Again, interesting choral sounds, and can really make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I think filmmakers today could learn a lot from looking back at music and human voices and different types of singing. But the music is just magical, I think, on Clash of the Titans. It's one of the one of the high points of the film. That and the poster art as well. There was some amazing poster art done for that particular film.
Yes.
But the fact that people would probably know Clash of the Titans from its title music is probably, a good marker of how well remembered it is. Mostly people remember the music of John Williams, perhaps, or Jerry Goldsmith. And as I say, in Lawrence Rosenthal's sort of catalogue of work, and this has to be amongst probably his best. And when you talk about the remake, Clash of the Titans, the music is fine. It's absolutely workmanlike and does the job, but certainly not a memorable theme there. And if I was to play you an extract now, or if you were to play me one now, I'd probably have trouble recognizing which sequence and even which film it's from.
Absolutely. But I gotta say, bravo on the casting of Clash of the Titans. I mean, I really liked Harry Hamlin, who went on, of course, to be in L.A. Law, and he played a really good Perseus. I'm going to tell you one person I really liked. It was Judy Bowker as Andromeda. And as I mentioned to you guys before contacting you, I actually tried to reach out to her for an interview, and I don't know whether she was on Facebook. There is a profile on there, but I don't know whether that's her. But it occurred to me, because I've done one tribute to an actor that's passed away on here before. Movie Miss 45 came out in 1981, and unfortunately Zoe Lund is no longer with us, but I had 2 interviews with her widowed husband on here, and it kind of occurred to me that I could do a tribute to Ray Harryhausen and maybe go after Judy Bowker on a later time. But I thought Judy Bowker's performance was really good as Andromeda, and what I really liked about her is, number one, I love that, going back to music, that wonderful harp sound whenever you see her spirit lift off the bed and goes towards that cage with the vulture. Beautiful sound of the harp. But I like the fact that she's courageous enough as Andromeda to go face Calibus. And I like that part of her. And she's willing to get chained and shackled up for the Kraken. She doesn't want to do it, but she's willing to. And I like that aspect she brought to Andromeda.
I think that kind of reflects what people see in sort of British monarchy, that sense of almost duty over everything else. So it's certainly a form of courage, but I think it's duty that, she would lay her life down for the people of the town, for the people of Joppa, and she would happily, or she was prepared to sacrifice herself because duty always comes first. And I think there's a certain grace about her performance, the way she walks, the way she carries herself. You could see her quite easily being a member of any European royal family in that sense. I think she played it very well. I have a bit of interesting trivia for you on the Judy Bowker front.
Okay.
The sequence where she's in the bath and she comes out and she's nude from behind.
Yep.
That was a body double. She was not prepared to be nude in the film behind, so that's a body double that plays that part.
Yeah. No, I did not know that. But yeah, I did try to reach out to her, but I'm really glad I got in contact with you guys. I mean, this is just terrific, and all this stuff on Ray Harryhausen, and he definitely deserves a tribute. But
that's our job. Our job at the foundation is to make sure that the resource that people need is there, and in a way that is now accessible. Because when Ray was alive, the creatures were in different places, the artwork, the script, the stills, the photography, the test footage was all scattered around effectively. Now it's all under one roof, and it's available for exhibitions, for educational sort of seminars, and for special screenings as well. Because of the 3 anniversaries we talked about of the films, we're having screenings of all of them, including quite controversially a colour screening of Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. That we're hoping that's going to be in Berlin later this year, because there hasn't been any commercial cinema screenings in Europe of the colour versions of Ray's films. And I say controversial because people often say, black and white films should never be coloured. Ray supervised and approved this colorization of Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and the reason it was filmed in black and white wasn't for aesthetics. It wasn't because he wanted to preserve a 1950s vibe. It was because Technicolor, the 3-strip Technicolor process, was very expensive, And also, when you're using miniature rear projections, you need very high quality photographic plates, and that wasn't possible on color 35 millimeter at the time. You would lose quite a lot. You'd lose a generation, as they call it, when you rephotograph color film. So when he made his first color animation film, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, there was a slight discrepancy when the creatures would come on. There was a slight sort of heightened grain, as they call it in the film. So Ray shot the early black and white films to help, as it were, hide the trick of dynamation and hide the animation tricks that he was using to present these creatures appearing photoreal. So hopefully we'll have that screening later this year, the colour screening of Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and we can fend off the boos and jeers from people that we've coloured a classic. We'll also make the black and white version available as well. So we might have a vote off and see which one wins out, but that would be fascinating.
Well, if the color version was supervised by Harryhausen, then you know what? I say go for it.
You know, if when the Beatles re-released Some of Hair music later on, that was originally recorded in monaural sound and re-released it in stereo, some of the fans said, this isn't what we want. But I think once both versions are there, and we're not trying to recolour the past and we're not trying to take away any black and white version, I think it's fine. And people have approached us to talk about doing retrofitted 3D versions. Well, you talked earlier about The Wizard of Oz, and I saw The Wizard of Oz there a couple of years ago for an anniversary screening at the IMAX in London.
Okay.
And it was a 3D version, and it looked spectacular. It was amazing. It never looked as clear and as sharp. Of course, the 3D looked fantastic, and the sound was absolutely stunning. But that doesn't mean it removes any of the charm of the original 2D version. You know, I think these films can live alongside in different forms, because anything that brings us back to a film and gets us to reassess it and enjoy it again, whether it's a remake of Clash of the Titans, brings us back to the original, or because we've seen the colour version, we want to go back to see the black and white, I think it's really essential to keep the conversation going. And that's why I'm thrilled to come on here today to talk about the 35th anniversary of Clash of the Titans, because obviously at the Ray Harryhausen Foundation it means the world to us, but it's important for us to know that other people like yourself, Greg, and your listeners are actually coming on that journey with us.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's an honor. Like I said, I love this film. Like I said, it's one of my favorites. I still watch it today. It doesn't get boring for me. And like I said, great cast. Those actors that played the gods in the film, like, wow, what a great cast. Like, Laurence Olivier was just a towering figure. What a great casting for Zeus.
He was spectacular. I mean, when we think of actors who've played Zeus, and when we think of, of the remake, who could fill Laurence Olivier's shoes? Well, pretty much no one. But in another bit of Clash of the Titans, insider information, they did have somebody, because at the time, Lord Olivier was not at his best. His health wasn't all it could have been. And in fact, when he worked on The Marathon Man for John Schlesinger in the mid-70s, he had a very difficult time with that project, because he wanted to work with John Schlesinger and Dustin Hoffman, but there was some physical demand on him that made it very difficult. And on some days it was hard for him simply to walk.
That was a great film too.
A fantastic film.
Oh, yeah.
I was very privileged to have met John Schlesinger when I was a young filmmaker. He's a great filmmaker. And of course,
Absolutely.
Midnight Cowboy as well.
Yes, a great film as well.
But so they had somebody in mind, and they had spoken to somebody that if the worst happened, we get to the first day of principal photography, what can we do? Who can we ask? And of course, Ray and Charles Schneer had a Hollywood Rolodex, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And the person they were going to speak to, and the person who was ready and had a space in his schedule, was Charlton Heston.
Oh, that would have worked.
And exactly. So when I've told it to people in the past, they've like, no, who could possibly fill these shoes? And when you say Charlton Heston, everyone has, oh yes, I could see that. Because, of course, he has the presence. He has the booming voice.
And he played Moses.
Oh, absolutely. He played Moses. He was on the Planet of the Apes. He was the Omega Man, or the Omega Man, depending on your pronunciation. So he's part of the genre, and he's a legit actor as well. So he would have been absolutely fabulous. And you can imagine him saying, release the Kraken. It would have been terrific. But we're very lucky. The cast we had, Laurence Olivier, very subtle actor.
You had Claire Bloom playing Hera, and you had Maggie Smith, who's still working today, still working strong, was in those Harry Potter films.
And Downton Abbey, of course, as well.
Yes, and we had Susan Fleetwood with the Owl, who I believe Susan Fleetwood passed away.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
And Pat Roach, we had, who's sadly no longer with us as well.
And of course, last but certainly not least, the gorgeous, the beautiful, the absolutely wonderful Ursula Andress as Aphrodite. Who better to play the goddess of love?
Well, absolutely. And the goddess of love she certainly was, because, at the time, they wanted to keep it quiet, but herself and Harry Hamlin, of course, had a relationship during the filming, and they later had a son together, and they split up shortly after that, so they were together for a couple of years. But yes, their son Dmitri was born in 1980 after filming was completed. It says here on Wikipedia, so I'm not letting the cat out of the bag if anyone thinks I am. And it said their relationship ended in 1982, but it was certainly kept away from the press at the time because it was a family film, and it would indicate to you how PR has changed. Now we might be saying to ourselves, look, if we've got a leading actor and a leading lady who are romantically involved, let's get that out there as part of our PR. Whereas at the time, of course, it wasn't considered a plus.
No, Ursula Andress was somebody else I considered going after for an interview as well, but I couldn't find any contact information. But she was also like in Dr. No, like she's still the celebrated Bond girl, and so it really worked to have her play Aphrodite. That was just perfect.
You're right, because she does bring all of that glamour of being I suppose she was the original Bond girl, wasn't she, when she came out of the sea in the bathing costume, looking for shells.
Yep.
Yes, she brings all of that appropriate sort of, if you like to call it, baggage with her.
Yes.
So she was beautifully cast in that. Somebody who I like in the cast, who doesn't get often mentioned as much because some of the other cast members are so large, is Neil McCarthy.
Neil McCarthy as Calibus, yes.
A very, very fine character actor who did lots of television in this country, and he sadly passed away only a few years after Clash of the Titans. He died in 1985.
Okay.
But he had a facial disfigurement called acromegaly, and it made him have a form of gigantism to his face. So when Colin Arthur created the makeup for Calibos, he worked with Neil using a lot of Neil's own features. Neil had a very pointed chin and very large cheekbones. And so that's what made that work so well, because he was a very fine actor, Neil. And I think he plays that role. He's very devilish.
Yes. Yeah, that was a great villain role, He's in there in the swamp and has all of his minions, as I like to call them.
Mm.
I love that scene where he stands up there and he takes the whip and he cracks it there, and the guy's got the little thing there. He puts that little symbol on.
Yeah, and he gives her the latest riddle or the latest rhyme, or it is a riddle, isn't it, for the next suitor to discover. But of course, Harry Hamlin's character of Perseus is cheating because he's heard the answer, so you haven't actually guessed.
You know what's funny? I was saying to somebody the other day when I originally went after Judy Bowker for a possible interview, I said, joking to a friend of mine, I said, I might have to solve a riddle to get her on here. Then I said, but Calibus says I don't want to fight with him, and I think he blocked me on social media.
Yeah, well, exactly. If that's all that happened, then you'd be lucky. But, the interesting thing about Calibos, of course, from a technical and creative point of view, it was the first time that Ray combined a real actor with an animated creature as well. So for the close-up facial sequences, it was Neil McCarthy for the dialogue, but for a lot of the fight sequences with that enormous tail whipping around in the swamps, and when he attacks Perseus, and when he steals Pegasus, that's an animated creature. So it was particularly hard for the swamp sequence where Perseus is grabbed around the throat and is being pulled from side to side by an animated Calibos. So interesting that throughout all of Ray's films, he never stood still. He was never what you'd call a one-trick pony. He always tried to develop the stop motion. He always tried to make the camera move where possible, integrate it as much as he could, and always try and change the sequence as well. So when people knew that it was a rear projection, that the live action was on a rear projection and the models were in front of that, you try and do different things to change your perception so that you felt there was a 360-degree turn with the fights. And I think he was pretty successful in that.
He didn't do that with, I'm trying to think what film that was. I think it was The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, where some woman had like a Medusa body and her tail went up around her neck and was strangling her. Was that not the same thing?
It was a similar thing. It was quite separate in that you saw that she was a dancing girl, wasn't she? That was put into a vase. So you kind of see her face briefly, and then she transforms when the casket is broken open. But you're right; it does cut back to her face. That's probably a very basic way of doing it through editing. This was much more complex because he was trying to marry a main character through two different techniques, through live action as well as animation. So I think when George Lucas, again going back to Jar Jar Binks, he wanted to have a fully animated, integrated lead character. Calibos it's like an early version of that, where you have an actor playing close-ups for lip sync, the full body in animation. And I think it's very successful. He's a very prominent and scary, probably as scary, I think, as Medusa.
Well, it's and he was also the one that unleashed those scorpions as well. And I loved again how the scorpions came into being. Like he takes that fork of his and stabs it into the bag, and it's Medusa's blood, and you see the scorpions just slowly getting bigger as they're coming towards the camera. And again, another great sequence there with the scorpions.
It really was. When I spoke to Ray about the enormous amount of creatures, we think about all of the creatures, plus Bubo the owl, plus the vulture. People often forget about the four-eyed vulture.
I haven't forgotten the vulture.
And the two-headed dog and everything else, and the Medusa and Kraken and so on. That's an enormous amount of work. And Ray said to me, they got so excited that they got the budget they were looking for, that rather than have to prune back the story, they got to make the film they wanted to, bar a few sequences that were cut. But he said then the enormous task fell to him to create all this animation. And when Ray had made the film, and by the time the film had come out, he felt that he really couldn't top it, and that this was perhaps maybe his last film, and that maybe there wouldn't be another. And although they had plans for a sequel to Clash of the Titans, and it was called Force of the Trojans, which was written by Beverly Cross, Maggie Smith's husband at the time, sadly it wasn't to be. So Ray decided to go into retirement, which was perhaps a wise decision in retrospect. And he spent his life in very comfortable retirement, visiting other filmmakers, being lauded on the sets with filmmakers such as James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Tim Burton.
He was even part of the John Landis film Spies Like Us as well.
He was. As you say, he was a great friend of John Landis, and John tried to get him into films. I think he also cameoed in Burke and Hare, John Landis' film about the Scottish grave robbers. So he was always available for filmmakers that he admired. And Terry Gilliam, of course, he was a fan of
loved Terry Gilliam.
Mm.
Oh, Terry Gilliam was great.
Well, it's interesting, when we had the memorial service for Ray, all of those great and good people came along, and we interviewed them and we talked to everyone, and I spoke to Terry Gilliam, and I said to him, Terry, did you realise that when you made Baron Munchausen in 1985, Ray said to me at the time that his own Baron Munchausen project now will probably never get made, because he enjoyed Terry's Baron Munchausen very much, despite the controversy at the time that it was released. And he felt that there was no opportunity now for him to make a definitive version because Terry had pretty much done it. And Terry didn't know that. And I thought, oh, that's rather sad, but I was pleased to be able to tell him that at the memorial. So, when filmmakers work so much in isolation, the assumption is, well, they must all meet for drinks and coffee, don't they? But they don't really. Directors don't work with other directors, for example, and often with special effects people, if it's a very specific type of special effect, you often can find you working either with a very small group or on your own. And when Ray sadly left us in May 2013, George Lucas was quoted as saying, without Ray Harryhausen, there would probably have been no Star Wars.
Oh, what a great thing to say.
A marvellous thing for George Lucas to say. And, George Lucas and Lucasfilm have been great friends to the Foundation, as has Steven Spielberg. So, we very much want to move forward with the same ethos that Ray had, which was to be inclusive, to try and speak to people when they ask us, not to get involved in any sort of unsavory discussions or any criticisms of other people's work, because Ray was a great believer in only saying positive things. And I think at the Foundation, with the plans we have leading up to his centenary, we're going to pretty much hold on to that ethos.
It's interesting. We talked about the remake of Clash of the Titans. What did Ray think about the remake of Mighty Joe Young?
Well, Ray was actually in the remake of Mighty Joe Young.
Oh, okay. I
in
didn't know
a brief
that.
sequence with Terry Moore, who was the original girl from the original film. In the party sequence in the tent, when Joe is brought into the big city,
Okay.
Ray actually plays a cameo in that.
I didn't know that.
I think Ray liked it very much because he was very interested in the new ways of doing things and the sort of animatronics that was involved. So I think that's probably a remake that Ray probably would approve and sees it as a sort of companion piece to his own film.
Okay. Well, next up from like I said, Clash of the Titans, my favorite of his films, one of my all-time favorite movies. I'd have to say my second favorite is The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. And again, last year I tried to reach out to Caroline Munro to do an anniversary for Maniac and also talk to her about Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and I had no luck with that. But I have to say, though, it brings back a lot of great memories. And I'll talk a moment here about Caroline Munro because, again, we talked about music. And that first sequence where you got her and Sinbad's having this vision of her, and the music, and then the way she's turning her body every which way, and you see the little symbol that she has on her hand.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. And she, again, like Ursula Andress and Judy Bowker, she's such an enchanting beauty to have in a movie like that.
Well, I can probably arrange for Caroline to come and have a chat with you. She's a trustee of the Harryhausen Foundation. There are 4 trustees at the moment: myself, Vanessa Harryhausen, Ray's daughter, and Simon McIntosh, and Caroline Munro. So I was with Caroline on Tuesday this week because we had a foundation meeting, a trustees meeting.
Oh yeah.
So I'm pretty sure I can put her in touch with you, and for you guys to have a chat about all things James Bond, Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and Star Crash, if you so desire.
Oh, I would love that. I would definitely appreciate that. I've had people put me in touch with other people before. I just talked to Ted White, who played Jason in Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and he's 90 years old. But boy, the stories of people he worked with, from John Wayne to Clark Gable, and he actually gave me the phone numbers to 2 actors he worked with, and I felt blessed that he would trust me with that. And of course, he could trust me with that, but I really appreciated that, the fact that, and I've had people tell me it's because I have a genuine love and enthusiasm, not just for the films I'm talking about, but the people that I am interviewing. And Caroline Munro, like I said, loved her in Golden Voyage. I even liked her in Maniac, which was a film Tom Savini did with her, and she was in that. And yes, she was in James Bond as well, with right opposite Mrs. Ringo Starr, Barbara Bach.
That's right, and of course she was the wife of Dr. Phibes in The Abominable Dr. Phibes with Vincent Price.
Wow, absolutely. Well, yeah, maybe I'll send you a message or something like that. I would love to have Caroline Munro on here. I think I tried to her on her webpage. I never heard, like, I've tried her on Facebook, and I got a message saying it was just a community page. And
That's
with
right.
those,
What I'll do is after we've spoken today, I'll put you in touch with her agents, and if that doesn't work out, I'll put you in touch directly with her. So either way, you'll definitely get to speak to Caroline.
oh, that would be great. Yeah, she is, like I said, just like Ursula Andress and even Judy Bowker. Like, these women have this almost like their beauty and how am I trying to put it? I think the word enchanting. It's something that just comes across in their presence in these films.
It really does. I mean, she's an iconic. She's an iconic person in herself. I mean, she has her own action figures. She was showing me recently the action figure from Star Crash that's recently been created for her, and it's one of those premium action figures that cost $200 or so. And she has one of those most recognizable faces from the 70s and early 80s.
Well, I loved her in Golden Voyage of Sinbad. I mean, she's great in that. Like I said, that first sequence, you just see Sinbad having that nightmare, and you see these images of her switching back and forth and the symbol. Great sequence. Again, great use of music. And I also got to say, Golden Voyage had one of the funniest lines in the film, too. I got to relate this because I remember this so well. I don't know whether Golden Voyage is on Blu-ray yet, but it's a film I'm waiting for. But,
yes, it is. It looks particularly good on Blu-ray. It's a spectacular transfer they've done.
Oh, I haven't got it yet. I'll have to order that. But I'm going to say that they had. Remember the guy in the film, the cowardly guy?
Yeah, Kurt Christian.
I liked him. There was a line in the film he gave. He says,
Shall I give you the line? I can give you the line if you want to hear it. It's trust in Allah, but tie up your camel.
That's not it.
Is that not it? That's not the funniest line? I think that's hilarious because he says it 2 or 3 times and he says it at the end of the film. What do you think is the funniest line?
Well, I agree with you, but the line I'm thinking about was, "My heart is full of bravery. I just have very cowardly legs."
Ah, yes.
I love that line. But you know what?
Sequence, yeah, where he thinks he's going to be on the ship for just a few days or a few hours.
But I got to say this. He was instrumental in taking out that 6-armed creature statue that they were fighting.
Yes, the Kali statue just at the Temple of the Centaur, and where they find the very last piece of the amulet to get you to the Fountain of Youth. But interestingly, Kurt turned up in the follow-up film, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, playing the son of Zenobia.
Okay, it's been a while since I've seen that one, but yes, I've seen that. I love it too when you have the creature battles, like you get the griffin and the centaur fighting in Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and we're rooting for the griffin, and I love the fact you hear them before you see them, and it's got that menacing presence to it, and of course in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, you had the ape creature there fighting with the saber-toothed cat.
Yes.
And those two going, some great clashes there. But you know what? It brings me back to Clash of the Titans. I love the title, Clash of the Titans, because it's very symbolic. You see, it's the word clash and Titans that really work here, because it's one factor fighting another, but what are the real factors fighting each other? It could symbolize Perseus versus whatever it is he's fighting, but I always felt it was like this. I always felt it was, in a way, Medusa versus the Kraken, because it's her head taking him out. But who is holding the head up? Perseus. Perseus is the real Titan.
Well, when they meet the Stygian witches, the 3 blind witches, and they need the eye to see Perseus before they decide they want to cook him, they describe the Kraken as the last of the Titans.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so they go, the last of the Titans. So, yes, you're right to think that the Kraken and the Medusa could be the 2 Titans. when I was younger, I thought that, and as I got older, I started to think as well, the will of man is more powerful than the enchantment of the gods. And in the end sequence, in the sort of the epilogue sequence, when we can hear Zeus's wonderful voice, he talks about when we are gone and when we're forgotten, we'll just be stars in the heavens, and it'll be man that will continue. And so as I became older, I started to realize that perhaps, it was, as you say, that it was man's fight against the gods that was the real clash of the titans. So it kind of works on several layers there, I think.
Yeah, I thought about that too, and I love that star sequence, especially when it shows Pegasus there, all lit up there, like in that formation in the stars.
Yeah, I mean it's a wonderful sequence, and it's really the cherry on the cake for Ray's career. There is nothing worse for filmmakers to go out on the damp squib, or to be scraping around trying to make their last film and it doesn't happen. Ray very much left the stage at a time that suited him. And as he became older and older, new techniques didn't take the place of Clash of the Titans, but new techniques came in front of an audience. And for a while, they were the techniques that people were paying money to see. Although they involved computers, they weren't computer graphics, they were motion controls. The cameras were controlled by computers, but it meant much more elaborate sequences could be achieved. But most of the special effects, when we think about the films of the 80s that had big special effects, we're talking Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Blade Runner, Back to the Future. They're not big creature features. It's only when, I think, Phil Tippett had the Tauntauns in the Empire Strikes Back and his marvellous Dragon Slayer that lots of people didn't get to see. They were the only two sort of glimmers of the old techniques and Ray Harryhausen's style of filmmaking. But all through the 80s, there was no real significant creature feature that you could point at and say, this is like the heir to Clash of the Titans, or this is the new Ray Harryhausen. It was really not until Jurassic Park and Steven Spielberg brought us those photorealistic dinosaurs that we could actually say, finally somebody is harking back to the era of Ray Harryhausen. And in fact, the sequence of the Gallimimer being bitten in broad daylight by the T-Rex is an homage to a sequence from the Valley of Gwangi, the cowboy dinosaur movie.
That was the one with the elephant, isn't it?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, the elephant fights with the T-Rex. So, filmmakers have created homages to Ray now for many a year. And it's lucky for us that people who were our age and possibly younger are now making films. So they were brought by their parents, as I was, to the cinema to see. Sometimes it might be cats and dogs singing on a piano. If it's a Walt Disney film, what can you do? You're not going to say no to seeing that. But when it was a Sinbad or a Jason and the Argonauts, it was a very, very special and unforgettable experience. And for people who went on to become filmmakers, they were able to turn around and tell Ray, look, if it wasn't for your films, I wouldn't have got into the industry.
Well, his films got me through school, at least my imagination.
Well, exactly. And for people who maybe didn't end up in the world of entertainment or filmmaking, then it maybe got them to look further into Greek mythology or the techniques of filmmaking, or as you say, just gets you through tough times, because I don't think anyone had an easy time at school. And if you can have something to look forward to, either a film to watch on TV, cable or VHS, or if so be it in the cinema, then that's great. And it's a fantasy world that I think that we're going to try and keep alive for as long as we can. Do
you have many memories of Jason and the Argonauts?
I do, because I saw that in the cinema a lot later on when it was on re-release.
I love the Hydra and the skeletons, Well,
the skeletons, given their official name, they're the children of the Hydra's teeth.
Okay. Oh, that's right. That's right. When they put all the teeth down the ground, I remember that. That's
right. So that's their official name, if you like. And we still have them in the collection, and they're still in pretty good condition. A lot of the creatures which have rubber on them have needed some restoration. And if people are listening to your program today, go to rayharryhausen.com. They can find out all about the foundation and some of the restorations we've done. And we try and pop those restorations up on Facebook and on Twitter. All the links there on the website. I think that's a great film. Most people pick it out as it being Ray's best film, and the skeleton sequence is the best sequence of all of Ray's films. I think it is. I think it's a marvelous film. I think at different times when you're watching films, for different reasons, people like different films. For me, my personal favourite is The Golden Voyage of Sinbad.
Love it. It's my second favorite, yeah.
Yeah, so I think if the film catches you at that pivotal moment, then you've been struck by the Harryhausen magic. And when Ray picked up his Academy Award from Tom Hanks, a special Academy Award, 24 years ago, it'll be 25 years next year, and Tom Hanks said to Ray, as part of the acceptance speech sequence, he said that, I got into acting after watching Jason and the Argonauts. I thought that was such fun, the adventure Jason had and fighting the skeletons. That's why I got into acting. So who would have thought that, a multiple Academy Award-winning actor would have got into something from a film which isn't known for its acting, but known for its monstrous confrontations?
Well, I have one little objection with Jason and the Argonauts. I always felt after the skeleton scenes, I got on the boat, and I found that they cut off too quick. I felt there was always a sequence missing where they take the fleece back because there was still that situation had not gone solved. What happens when they take the fleece back,
Look, I totally agree, and I think it's to the pressures of budget and of delivering films. It would be nice to feel that there was just something else, and even if it was just that maybe there was a bit of Talos hanging around or something at the end, you felt it needed something. But hey, the best compliment in the world is to say that left me leaving wanting more, and I think that's what Ray did in that film. He left people like yourself and myself wanting more.
Now, when he got the Academy Award for Lifetime Achievement, I'm guessing they played clips of all of his films. Did they play clips from Clash of the Titans?
Yes, they did. So it was a montage of all of those iconic sequences. Pegasus and Medusa were in there.
Oh, like I said, I think the Medusa sequence might be my favorite of all the sequences. Like, just the mood, which is why in the remake it just turned me off so much, because I remember how in the Ray Harryhausen version how that played off so well, like just little things like the bead of sweat on Harry Hamlin's head and stuff that provided a sense of tension and suspense. And
because he's a good actor, we've invested ourselves in him, and he reflects maybe some of our hopes and aspirations as we get older. He's got the beautiful girl he's trying to achieve in life. So the more he reflects our life, the more we feel jeopardy on his behalf, because he's kind of representing us in a way. He's bringing our hopes and fears, and he's at a point now where he might actually die. So it's all credit to Harry Hamlin for bringing us literally with him into that temple, because I felt genuinely scared. When I saw that film in the cinema in 1981, I was pretty scared at that sequence.
Yes, and we haven't talked about Charon the ferryman either, and he's only had a small part in the movie.
That's quite a small part. It's a skeleton and not an animated one, so that's very much a costume and makeup effect.
Oh, it worked.
It works quite well. It's very subtle, but I think sometimes, subtlety can work. And given that you're about to go into a double fight when you get off the boat, you've got the two-headed dog, and then you're straight into the temple, I think to have had anything more elaborate on the boat would have been a mistake. And it works really well.
Well, I liked it when he turns his head, you can hear the sound like of rocks rubbing together, So the actor, I didn't know that was an actor, so well done.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of sort of actor and sort of full-size sort of puppet as well. So it works quite well. But as I say, it's sometimes the simplest and most straightforward routes give you the best and most sort of dramatic effects. And the music plays a part there because it's very calm. It's sort of the calm before the storm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, of course, Ray also did the, what was it, the Three Worlds of Gulliver? He did a Gulliver film.
That's right, the Three Worlds of Gulliver.
Okay. That one I actually have not seen, but I know they had Jack Black in a Gulliver film not too long ago, and when I was doing research upon doing this interview with you, I was like, I had forgotten that he had done a Gulliver film.
Yes, he had. There's a few other actors who've done Gullivers. Richard Harris did a Gulliver as well a long time ago. But Ray's Gulliver is considered to be the sort of the definitive version, with Kerwin Matthews as Gulliver.
Okay.
And he's fabulous. You know, he
Kerwin Matthews was Sinbad in Seventh Voyage, right?
He was. He was the
Okay.
original Sinbad. And we wanted him, you know, the foundation or the Ray Harryhausen wanted him for Golden Voyage of Sinbad, but he wasn't available. It was a schedule clash, so he would have been back for a second time had it not been for that. So he would have been older, but he certainly looked the part and would have continued.
Well, John Philip Law worked.
He was brilliant. John Philip is a fantastic Sinbad,
Yep.
and he has a great 70s look, John Philip does, as does Caroline. And interesting, you talk about the centaur. I asked Ray recently because we filmed with Caroline in Ray's house when we recorded the commentary for the Golden Voyage of Sinbad.
Okay.
And which amazingly didn't have a commentary recorded. And we had recently restored the centaur. We'd had our official restorer, Alan Friswell, come in and look at the centaur. And I was talking to Ray about it because the centaur, if you remember, has got sort of spiky ginger hair.
Okay.
And Ray said to me the reason he chose that hair was that David Bowie was very big at the time in the early 70s, and he kind of thought the spiky ginger hair would be a good look to give the centaur. So there you go. You know, Ray was plugged in to sort of pop culture from the time.
I gotta say, I love the griffin in that film too. The great looking bird.
Well, we have both those creatures in the collection, and they're both in pretty good shape. We hope to tour all of those creatures, along with everything from Clash of the Titans, over the next few years. So, you know, by keeping in touch on social media, people can see if there's going to be an exhibition or a screening near them.
And yet, in another film we haven't touched upon is, of course, Mysterious Island, which when I wrote to Ray Harryhausen, I had not seen it at the time, but I have since seen it, and I enjoyed it very much.
It's a great film. You know, it's got a marvelous Captain Nemo performance there from Herbert Lom.
Okay.
I think sometimes Herbert Lom's performance is forgotten because of James Mason's turn in Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But I think he does a really credible performance. He has that sense of mystery and danger about him, and being sort of the outsider. And it's just a wonderful adventure story. And it's an unexpected Harryhausen film. It's one that that and First Men in the Moon are sometimes one that people choose as liking them for different reasons, because they have a slightly different pace or because they had unexpected creatures. So yeah, that is a good film. And again, a wonderful score by Bernard Herrmann. You know, Bernard scored Three Worlds of Gulliver, Jason and the Argonauts, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and Mysterious Island. So to have one film scored by Bernard Herrmann would be wonderful, but four, that's absolutely terrific.
Yeah, Herman did a lot of work too, notable with Alfred Hitchcock.
He did. He was Hitchcock's favourite composer until they had a falling out, but then he wasn't. But he is by every measure probably the most significant film composer of the 20th century. So he's really a significant part of Ray's success for those middle films. And we have at the Foundation, we've discovered audio recordings of Mr. Herrmann conducting and barking at the orchestra on quarter-inch magnetic tape. So we hope to have a lot of those digitized and remastered onto digital tape. And hopefully we might be releasing, depending on the rights issues, releasing some clips or some entirities of those recordings in coming years.
Well, tell me, with all I'm excited about these commentary tracks because, you know, I love listening to those. Is there any chance this year there will be a 35th anniversary release for Clash of the Titans with the commentary?
The straight answer is I don't think there's any plans for it, because they would have to have been in touch with us now to have arranged that. No, so probably not for this year. And I think the film needs a remastering, because the Blu-ray, which did come out, which looked fine, didn't look at its best. And I think the film needs a bit more tender loving care to come out again. But we'd be happy to work with Warner Brothers and work with them on the commentary that we recorded with Ray. So I think
Yeah.
the fans would love to hear what Ray has to say.
Oh,
Looking back at
absolutely.
that classic.
And well, send out a special thank you to that clip you sent me of Ray talking about the origins of the Medusa
Yes.
creation. I appreciate that. I have done like last year. I wasn't podcasting. I've been reviewing films since 1996. I didn't start here at CHSR until 2005, but it wasn't until last year that I started podcasting here at the station. And after I got that first initial interview, I was like, oh, gee, that was fun. I want to do more of this. And sometimes at the movie theater, there's a lot of stuff playing I don't care for, and it's kind of fun to talk to somebody like yourself about a film that has meant so much to me, and spend time talking about that. And my interviews have gotten a lot of hits online, and I'm not saying that pridefully, but I've had people tell me that they've been either reintroduced or introduced to certain films because of the interviews I've done, and I feel quite grateful for that. And I'm hoping to introduce Ray's work to an even broader audience on here.
Well, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you today, Greg. I'd be happy to come back again and speak to you about any of the other films we have coming up, and also the projects we have coming up, because in 2020 it'll be Ray's centenary, and we've launched something called Harryhausen 100, which is a series of different events, screenings and exhibitions that will happen every 29th of June, which is Ray's birth date. And this year we've launched a competition to find somebody to design a new logo, a new Harryhausen 100 logo for us. So all the details of the competition are there on the rayharryhausen.com website. But be happy to come back on and speak to you about any of that, and of course speak to you about anything regarding any of Ray's work.
Yeah, well, you know what? This is, like I said, come June 12th, Clash of the Titans will be 35 years old, and anybody hears this, I recommend them check it out. I love this film. Great movie. And you said there's a couple of other anniversaries in there as well. You want to mention those again?
Yes, thanks, Greg. It's the 50th anniversary of Raquel Welch in 1 million years BC, and the 60th, the big 6-0, for Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
What was Raquel Welch like?
Well, apparently, a little bit of inside gossip on Miss Welch. Ray was telling me that she complains about having to wear the fur bikini, and she would take a very small clippers and clip at the fur to make it smaller and smaller. So, of course, as you know, films are not always shot in story order. So there's points in the film where the furry bikini is sometimes bigger and sometimes smaller. So a little bit naughty to try and be too revealing there.
I actually have not seen that film, but I know what one you're talking about. I've seen the poster, and I'm like, I haven't seen that. And I'm like, Raquel Welch. You know, when you mentioned Raquel Welch, the first image that went through my head was that image in the Naked Gun 33 1/3, where she ends up with the microphone in her mouth. I don't know if you've seen that film.
Yeah, and I love those Leslie Nielsen films. My favourite Raquel Welch, other than 1 Million Years, is The Fantastic Voyage. Fantastic movie.
Okay.
Where she gets shrunk to the size of an atom and injected into a scientist's head inside a submarine with Donald Pleasance.
Oh, Donald Pleasance, fantastic.
Great sci-fi film from the late 60s.
Yeah. Wow. Yep. But 35 years, Clash of the Titans, and like I said, I was 9 years old when that came out, so I'm happy to celebrate that film. When this, I'm not sure when I'm going to have this podcasted out online, because this is being recorded. I know here at the station they want the broadcasted here first, and this interview has happily gone on over 90 minutes, so I'm proud of that. It'll be a couple of weeks. I'm going to play it here, but whenever I get it podcasted out, I will give the link over to you, and you guys can put it on your website, at the foundation, put it on your Facebook page, put it wherever you want to. You have my blessing on that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Greg.
Yes, and I'll be in contact with you with regards to contacting Caroline Munro, because I'd love to have her on here.
Yes, we'd love her to be on there, and I'm sure she'd be only too thrilled to talk to you about Golden Voyage and all of her other wonderful films, the Dracula films as well. She was with Vincent Price and Christopher Lee. How wonderful is that?
Wow. And I got to send a special shout out. Who's the Connor fella that I initially talked to from the foundation?
Oh, Connor, he's our brilliant collections manager, Connor Heaney. He is very much the rock of the foundation that organises everything and looks after. He's our special gatekeeper.
Well, he was the one I initially heard from to get this interview, and he put me in touch with you. I want to say a special thank you and a special shout out to him for that. I think it's great that you guys are accessible to people like myself and make it available that we can get in close and get all these details and hear about all these great stories. And of course, like I say, I still have the Ray Harryhausen autograph. I'm glad I got him before he had passed away. I somewhere in the earlier to mid '90s I wrote to him. So, and I was happy to get that. I felt bad about his passing, but you know what? He lived a good full life, and he had made a lot of great achievements. That's made a lot of people happy.
He certainly has, and I know he'd be thrilled that we're talking with you today about his legacy.
Yeah, well, I would have loved to have had him on, but like I said, back at that time, I wasn't doing podcasting. But I'm really quite overwhelmed that I'm able to do this. I've got 2 interviews today. I got another one little later on, and it's like it's going to be 25 interviews that I've done, and I'm like, wow, like I watch some of these films and I'm like, I talked to this person, how did I get here? And I'm just from a small town here in Canada. I don't know if you know where Fredericton, New Brunswick is.
I don't. I will have a look, though, straight after this interview.
Yep, we're part of Atlantic Canada. And of course, I know you're familiar with Vancouver and British Columbia and Toronto, but we're kind of on the other side.
I've filmed on Vancouver Island in the past.
Yeah, but we're Fredericton is part of New Brunswick, and of course there's Moncton and St. John, and there's Halifax, Nova Scotia is very nearby. I think the closest thing we have to celebrities here are the Trailer Park Boys, and I don't know if you know who they are.
No, I don't. No, sorry.
They're kind of our Cheech and Chong, only there's 3 of them. But no, I would recommend if you get a chance, look up the Trailer Park Boys because Ivan Reitman produced their first movie.
Oh, wow.
And there was 3 movies done, and he produced their first one. They're weed smokers, so that's the kind of humor you got. But that is about the closest thing that we've got to mainstream stuff here. And Hobo with a Shotgun, of course, was shot up here as well with Rutger Hauer. But I'm trying to open it up, too, so that there's a little more attention come to Atlantic Canada because the film industry has not exactly been overly kind to Canada. And I think there's a lot of great emphasis and places to film up here in Canada, because a lot of our actors are going to the States, I find.
I hope we get a chance to speak again soon, Greg, and by that time you will have spoken hopefully to Caroline as well. So.
Well, you know what? We'll have to arrange that. And you know what? I'm going to close off here for a moment. So I just got to say, happy anniversary, 35th anniversary to Clash of the Titans, and happy anniversary, 60th anniversary to Earth versus the Flying Saucers. And there's 50th anniversary for, would you say it was 1 billionth BC?
Yes, 1 million years BC.
Oh, yes. I got to see that now. I know Raquel Welch was in that. Well, thank you very much for coming on here. I appreciate it, and I'm tired. I apologize for taking up this much of your time, but it's never been boring for me. And like I said, when this is done, feel free to post it wherever you please. You have my permission, and I'll let you know when I podcast that out.
No, thanks, Greg. Well, let's keep in touch, and I'd love to do this again soon.
I would like to do that too. God bless, and you have yourself a great day.
You too. Cheers, Greg. Take care now.
Yep, bye.
Bye now.